Hi, Anna.
Hi, Christina.
And hi, Jemma. Welcome. Welcome today to this spiritual fix. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here.
I love that you're here. I'm a big TikTok fan. I love how you manage to fit so much wisdom into a 60-second clip.
Oh, thank you.
So,
Yeah, it is kind of jam-packed and I'm a talker, so it's kind of a good challenge for me to have actually to have to keep it
yeah.
shorter.
And that's actually how I found out about you was one of your viral TikToks came on and you were talking about the reason why. And then a lot of people quoted you about how 80% of divorces now are initiated by women. And then if you're looking at college educated women, it's 90%. And you go into the whole dynamic of why women are more I don't know if disgruntled, disappointed, jaded. I don't know what the word was you used, but why ultimately the woman is deciding to end it. Cause I think you were talking about the emotional work is in the woman's hands
hmm
traditionally in hetero
hmm
relationships to manage the relationship. And that burns us out.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that I didn't know the specific stats until more recently, but I always knew that I grew up hearing this. My mother and mother-in-law, both therapists or partners actually in a therapy practice. And so I always heard about how it's usually the women who initiate divorce in hetero relationships. And so I just thought everybody knew that. And then, you know, as I was hearing about friends getting divorced and clients getting divorced, again, I just assumed everyone knew that. And then I suddenly realized people don't know that stat. We tend to know the stats around how many, first, second, third marriages end in divorce, but we don't know who's initiating it. And I thought, I'm a little suspicious about that, does,
Yeah.
right?
Right. It's just, yeah. Part of me wonders, well, is it because, okay, not to be sexist here, but is it
Right.
because men are traditionally getting lazier in relationships? Or is it because maybe we're harder to please? I don't know. Because sometimes we're like, I'm in a situation with men
hmm
and they're just like totally able to like digest the moment. And I don't know if it's my hormones or what, because I've heard after menopause it gets a lot easier to live in the moment. but but I'm
Oh,
over here being like, what can I fix? What needs do I do? Da, 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 da. And like,
Um,
yeah,
I don't,
I
I
don't
don't,
know.
yeah, I mean, I think those are all really good questions because I think in the same way that you've maybe heard me talk about that we have to stop telling women that they're crazy, and women do it. We participate in that as well. We
Oh,
will say, "Oh, she's
absolutely.
crazy." It's the go-to insult and dismissive criticism when a woman is being expressive with her feelings, right? And in
hmm
that same way, I think this idea that we've all kind of internalized about how, oh, it's so hard to make a woman happy, women are never happy. I think that's related to patriarchal values and
Yes.
messages as
Mm-hmm.
well. And so I really think it's important to move away from that. I think women can actually be really good at cultivating their own happiness. I think it's more about the fact that we've been conditioned, supported, encouraged to prioritize meaningful relationships from a very young age. Young boys are discouraged from that. They're steered more towards independence, competition. We are taught to cultivate these intimate relationships with friends, right? And so we learn the skills. And so women in long-term relationships, because of all these opportunities and encouragement, we're monitoring how close the relationship is. And so we're going to be, not always, but more likely to identify when disconnection is setting in
Right.
faster. I think it's
Like the
that.
canary in the coal mine. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so what I notice is that men who have been given many opportunities to understand emotions and talk about them and it doesn't threaten their masculinity, they will help in identifying when in a partnership they're becoming disconnected, right? So it's really kind of about opportunities to practice those skills and that mindset.
Yep. Yep. Funny,
What do you
funny,
think?
just funny side note, real quick before
Yeah.
because I would love to respond to that, is that I was listening to a podcast recently that was, apologies, I have a puppy at my door. If you guys can you guys hear that?
Yeah, just
A
it's
little
fine.
bit.
We can edit it out later.
Okay.
Just
Okay. So I was listening to a podcast recently, was talking about the medical history of the understanding of the uterus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was talking about how up until probably the early 20th century they thought it was wandering. It was described as an octopus that wandered around the body. And then there was also this comparison, and I keep thinking of it, even though it was hilarious. It was like a book in 1840, or it was like in the 1840s or something like this. And it was like a major mainstream doctor. And the way that he described things was he was like, imagine that you are riding a horse and you're trying to get your horse from point A to point B. And imagine you have two horses. One horse is very well behaved and it'll just walk from point A to point B, and it like minds your directions, and it kind of does everything it needs to.
Uh-oh.
And then the other horse is bucking and kicking you off, and it's trying to go around in circles, and it's trying to go this way and that way, and it won't go straight. And then it's going over to the left, and then it's going to stop eating here, and it's going to do this and that. And they're like, you can't help if the female body is this second horse
Oh.
in which your mind is trying to get from point A to point, or you're trying to get from point A to point B, but you have this body that's just working against you.
Mm.
Oh
Yeah.
God, the feelings I had with
Yuck.
I saw a meme, and it was like a Freud writing a prescription, and it was between a Freud or something and a patient, and the patient was actually, it was actually the husband of the patient. He said something like, my wife, who has 7 children in 8 years and has never had an orgasm, seems to be going crazy. Can you please write her a prescription?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah. But to answer, what you were saying, like I think that you're absolutely right in terms of, we're coming into this period in which it's not so much like I just went to my library and saw a book that was like how to take care and feed your husband for a happy
Oh.
life.
Oh.
Right. And this book
Oh,
is not
God.
that old.
Burn it.
Oh.
I wanted to go up to the librarians and be like, seriously, do you
Right,
still have
right.
this in your
How
collection?
can you carry this? Yeah.
Do you never call for obsolete
Right.
texts?
Right.
Yeah, but at the same time, like I believe that probably in the area I'm at, like there's probably a lot of people who are still at that place where
Yeah, there are.
it is a mothering relationship that women are taught to cultivate with their children and their husbands, right?
Yes, which is so destructive to physical intimacy. And yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you hear about it all the time. And so even if, so many women are saying, I wish, in heteronormative relationships, I wish that my, husband would express his feelings with me, would be more vulnerable with me, so I could have a sense of his inner being. And then there are other women who are saying, well, I was with a guy like that, and I got to tell you, there were times where I was like, could you rein it in a little bit? Like, that's too much emotion. And so it's finding, and so, people talk about finding the balance. I think what it's actually about is, if you're with a partner who is more in touch with his feelings but hasn't learned how to self-regulate, to manage those feelings on his
Mm.
own, and he's depending too heavily on you to help him, navigate those feelings, you are going to feel like his mother.
Right.
That's what we do for our kids when, when they're young and they're learning how to to self-regulate, right? So we need to be able to self-regulate and co-regulate.
Right.
Yeah.
So in a way, one of the best things we can do for the future is teach our sons to
Absolutely.
emotionally regulate so that their future partners, if they're hetero,
Mhm.
their wives or whoever, aren't having to do it for them.
Yeah.
You're right. And for guys, what I notice is, even though I'm seeing a lot of more evolved, aware, younger guys, like some of these men who are coming to me in their early 30s, I'm just so impressed. They're saying, I realize that I'm, not as in touch with my emotional landscape as I could be, maybe not in those words. And I want to evolve, and I want to learn relational skills. And they are seeking out and finding the books and the podcasts to learn, to figure out what they can do differently. I mean, that is so impressive to me. And yet society still calls on them to compartmentalize their
Yeah.
emotional intelligence, right? Which is really disturbing. I mean, my son is now 20, but when he was a lot younger, one time he was talking to me about some struggle he was going through with friends. And at some point in the conversation, I said to him, okay, so when you go to school tomorrow, how do you want to initiate a conversation with them around this? And he looked at me like, oh, do I have to explain to this woman how the world works? I was like, Mom, there's no way that I can bring that up with them. It's going to make them so uncomfortable. Guys don't talk about that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So they have to compartmentalize, right? They can maybe talk with members of their family who have these discussions with their partners, but it's still, they still can't do it with their friends.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's also the patriarchy, right? Which is
You, yes.
yeah, right.
So both people, this is the thing, both men and women are suffering
Hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
of that, right? It, patriarchal pressure, of what it means to be a man. I like Bell Hooks kind of description of patriarchal masculinity, right? I don't really love the talk about toxic masculinity,
Hmm.
just because I think automatically it's insulting. Like if somebody started talking about toxic femininity, my guard is up a little bit
Yeah.
already,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's
I
true.
like the combination of, patriarchal masculinity, and then also feminist Liz Planck's description of mindful masculinity, that's the goal,
Yeah.
right? I love that because men are being conditioned to not only feel, alienated from other people in their lives, their partners, their kids, but also from themselves. So they are suffering, in terms of who brings it up in the relationship. The women are often going to call it out first, but it doesn't mean that the men aren't suffering. They maybe just don't have conscious awareness of how they're suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the masculine, we before the episode we were talking a little bit about the divine masculine, divine feminine that exists within us. It almost feels as if the divine masculine is suffering from overexposure because of the patriarchy. I know that seems like a strange
No, tell me
distinction.
more about
Like
what you're thinking.
like just like how when something is allowed too much rain and doesn't have that balance, right? It can kind of grow in a way that is it kind of overgrows, right? It's like it needs its checks and balance with the other part of it, right? So that's,
Mhm.
and so then you see that interesting thing. I don't know that that's me going down a rabbit hole in my
Like
psyche.
a weed, like a weed's that's not getting pruned or something.
Yeah, kind of like a weed that's not getting room, something like that. I don't know. All of this exists in balance, right? Nature is looking for a balance in all things,
Mm,
and we haven't allowed that balance to happen. So we're seeing it in all the people around us and all of our relationships. We're seeking the balance within ourselves, but also trying to look at other people for it, like to create that. And so then you get with one partner, and that partner may have an overabundance of one, and then you're then compensating on your side, and then it becomes this dance. So I would,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, because so I think when you talk about balance, I often think of balance about relational properties, right? About a relational mindset. So I get what you're saying. It's true. If it becomes too much about, again, the men are conditioned to think that they have to handle everything on their own, that the value is in their independence. So they're often not thinking in a relational way. Women are conditioned to think in a relational way.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
totally. All right, should I start with one of our questions?
Yes. Otherwise, I could
Okay.
just talk with Gemma forever. We
Yeah, I
could go
know. I
down so
know.
many rabbit holes. So,
So, what are the fundamental differences between men and women? Or we were okay. I'm gonna take that out.
Okay.
So we've been talking in this series about the divine masculine and the divine feminine. So we've already kind of set up the definition of what that means. Divine masculine meaning, part of us, male or female or non-binary, we might have more masculine energy or more feminine energy in us. So we're talking more about those roles, like the person that are, well, actually in this situation, we're kind of talking about
Yeah.
societal stuff. So we are talking about men and women here. So fuck that. We're gonna delete that. Okay. So sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So if we're talking about hetero relationships in
Mhm.
this culture, what do you think are the fundamental differences that men and women have in a relationship that lead to the communication breakdown?
I think it's a lot about that we've been conditioned to think that men and women are so different. Are there differences? Yes. However, we're not as different as we've been led to believe, right? So in that social conditioning, I think what happens is it really limits our sense of self-worth. So men are, given all these messages that they internalize, that their worth is about doing, is about being, good providers, is about their career success. And so even men who are in touch with their emotions, who are really great connectors, very skilled at that, they will still describe their strengths as related to doing. They don't get that their value is about being. And then for women, we receive all these messages that we internalize, that our value is about prioritizing the care of others, and and neglecting the care of ourselves. And so we then feel selfish if we prioritize our own care. And there's more awareness around that now, in terms of the importance of caring for yourself, nourishing yourself, in order to be able to show up for other people as well, right? To not get resentful. So I think those internalized, messages from society are not only limiting our self-worth, I think they're leading to a lot of problematic patterns within relationships. And there's a whole range there, right? That because men are discouraged from displaying unpleasant emotions, beyond, kind of the primary emotions that sometimes show up before they flip to frustration and anger. And the same with pleasant emotions, right? People are not that comfortable with a guy who's like jumping up and down with joy and exuberance. It's like, they're okay with women doing that. So for men, their emotional experience gets very narrow for both pleasant and unpleasant emotions. And then for women, we're taught to focus on everyone else's emotions. So we're in touch with ours, but then we also have some challenges with managing our emotions and soothing ourselves and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just genuinely convinced that there's probably huge swaths of generations of, even especially like I'll use my, as an
Hmm.
elder, I'm on the cusp of millennial and elder,
Okay.
millennial and Gen X, but are that just have literally developed no emotional maturity in that way, right? That ability to self-regulate, that ability to do all that. Like there's just so many people who are just operating that way. Some people don't discover it till they
Hmm.
have kids, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's all kinds of, as we know, all kinds of numbing behaviors, avoidant behaviors, trying to avoid the emotions that we don't trust we can move through. We don't
Yeah.
think we can handle them,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
right?
And
It's really sad.
Yeah.
understanding the problem is part of it, but then I guess healing or transformation is the second part. So
Hmm.
like if a man is aware of this, okay, a man's listening right now, he's like, wow, I can see how society has made me
Hmm.
have a really small amplitude in my range of what are acceptable emotions. Like how can someone knowing that, how can someone step into feeling more emotion? Like it just seems very abstract. Like, is there a how to, or there some hacks?
Well, I refer to some of the people who've been researching this and written great books on this, like Mark Brackett's book, Permission to Feel. Usually with clients, I use the emotion identification chart. I think it's called the mood meter, that's in his book. He didn't come up with it, but he uses that too. And he, in his book, helps us understand how to use that. So the research shows that if we can more specifically identify what we're feeling, so not just, ugh, I feel terrible, right? But specifically know, it's called granulation. What is it? Hopelessness, discouragement, fear, embarrassment. What are you feeling? And then, once you can identify it and understand what energy is attached to that, the reason that I love the chart that he uses is there's a correlation between what you're feeling and your energy, right? Like a high energy, unpleasant state, like, anger, versus a low energy, unpleasant state like hopelessness. Right. And the same for the pleasant emotions. And after the identification is understanding, then I think the process of self-compassion really plays into this. So um, Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion, she's a self-compassion researcher, and I've done a number of her self-compassion intensives, and learned a lot about how effective that is. So really just humans have a tendency to be so self-critical, right? So our inner world is not a safe place to be when we aren't even aware that we're being self-critical. Even when I listen to people in sessions ask why questions, they'll say, I mean, why do I da 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 da? Why? And it's under the guise of they're being curious, and it actually sounds to me like more self-criticism,
Right. It's the
right?
persecutor in the drama
Yeah.
triangle. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than, and so I always say, okay, let's switch those to how or what questions so that you can be kind to yourself. So it's just acknowledging, if it's an unpleasant emotion, this is what I'm feeling. Ugh, it's awful to feel that way. And to literally tell yourself and use your own name, I'm sorry, like, Jemma, I'm so sorry that you're suffering right now. That's really hard. And then to be able to ask yourself, what do I need to hear right now? So that you can then comfort yourself, so that you just start gaining more self-trust, and the ability to sit through unpleasant emotions. And I also really believe what Brene Brown talks about, that we also have difficulty trusting the pleasant emotions, right? That when we feel joy, we suddenly get scared that the other shoe's about to drop and maybe we can't sit in that joy too long. So it's just not just identification, but comfort with moving through emotions. And then you can start moving on to, how do I want to engage with people and activities during the day to play a part in what I want to feel, right? So then it moves into kind of the how of happiness, which is Sonia Lyubomirsky's work, because she talks about how 10% of our happiness is cultivated from circumstantial stuff, where we live and where we work, and 40% is genetic, but even that is not a given that all those genes are going to be turned on, and then the other 40% is in our control. It's about how we decide to move through our day, what activities we engage in. So we actually have a decent amount of agency over our fulfillment, and to recognize how that's connected to what emotional states we want to feel more of.
That's fascinating. What's the other 10%?
So it's, okay, I'm only at 90. That's true. That's a good
no.
question. No, yeah,
No.
no, like,
Is it food? Just kidding.
yeah, food's a big one for
It's
people in
probably, in
terms
my
of
case, it's
comfort.
water. Water. Did I
Yeah,
drink
no,
water
you know what it
today?
is? I stated it wrong. It's that 50% is genetic. That's
Okay.
what it is. Yeah, but because of epigenetics, in terms of our environment and our experiences, right, that's going to affect how those genes are turned on.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So that's for men or women struggling with emotional breadth. And then what about the people who are chronically empaths, and feel like they're being leached energetically? That's more of the
So
feminine,
yeah, again, because of the messages that we're given, that's our worth. So when you start recognizing that your worth is not just about how you show up for other people, how you help them, how you are taking responsibility for their emotional states, as you start identifying your worth in other ways, you'll start pulling away from that a little bit in terms of being able to set different boundaries. You will have less of a desire to be draining yourself in that way, right? Because it's in part, we're kind of, we're trying to secure our love.
yeah, it's a worthiness thing, really,
It
when you
is.
overgive and overperform, I think.
Yeah. That,
Yeah,
if I really show up for someone, if I'm really helpful for them, then how could they possibly ever reject me or abandon me?
right, right. So as you become more self-loving,